What's up, everybody? A non-emergency edition of the Celtics Talk podcast. But we did get to talk to Brad Stevens this morning over at the Auerbach Center. Some insight into how this Celtics offseason has played out, how it might proceed forward, and some interesting nuggets coming out of that. So we're going to play some sound from that, give some thoughts on what Brad said as part of the day. We also got a chance to catch up with some of the summer leaguers. Hugo had his first Boston session. Also, Jordan Walsh and Baylor Shireman talked, and as well as Coach Matt Reynolds. So we'll give you a little glimpse of that as well. I also got a chance to catch up with Derek White today. We're going to play a small snippet of that, but y'all going to have to wait till tomorrow to hear the whole thing. There's just too much news going on today because it was bustling. We were laughing. There was the media scrum that arrived over at the Auerbach Center this morning rivaled the NBA Finals contingent, every station in Boston, invading to hear what Brad Stevens had to say. And we'll play you can fast forward later in this episode. We'll play the full run. Talked for about 24 minutes. Touched on just about everything you might want to hear. I think he was pretty brutally honest in most regards. I think he also, just kind of like stressed the reason for these moves, saying like, look, this offseason has played out the way it has because of that second apron. Maybe the most notable thing to come out of it was when he was asked about the center position and the fact that the team had, on draft night, said that trying to re-sign Luke and Al Horford was a priority. Well, Luke's already signed with the San Antonio Spurs, getting that big $40 million contract. And Brad pretty much admitted that it's unlikely that Al Horford will be back. And I think we all knew that, but just a little bit more confirmation. He wouldn't completely shut the door, but it sure sounds like the Celtics understand their own financial limitations, and Al is exploring his options outside of Boston. Obviously, a lot of rumors about whether he'll land in San Francisco with the Golden State Warriors, maybe some other opportunities depending on how the rest of the league shakes out. But it kind of makes sense here. Like, Al is probably going to find more money on the open market than the Celtics could offer. The Celtics, if we're being honest, have to prioritize sort of what's the next version of their front court looks like, and maybe that person isn't even in house yet. But you do need to start figuring out like your the front court of the future, and at least the players that will comprise some of that depth there. I thought it was very interesting. A lot of Celtics, obviously their entire summer league roster went through a session in the morning, and as those guys were clearing out, Nimi Keita hit the floor for a session. Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla were watching that. Right as we were exiting, Luka Garza, fresh off signing his contract, also came on the floor and started doing some work. So a pretty bustling Auerbach Center beyond even us media invading. It was like a lot of the players were there. Brad had told us earlier that Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown had been there. Jayson's been there almost every day to work out as he rehabs from this Achilles surgery. Jaylen Brown was there, so he works his way back from his own knee procedure, went through a shooting workout, and Brad expressed a lot of optimism about where they are this early in their sort of rehabs from those surgeries. With Jaylen, it's pretty standard here. Like they still feel pretty confident he's going to be ready to go on the start of training camp, and that he's making progress from the procedure on that knee. With Tatum, and this is probably my other big takeaway, he pressed on it in terms of they haven't put a timeline, and Brad was pretty firm that they're just not going to put a timeline on it. And again, like part of like the difficulty in assessing where this season goes is the fact that you just don't know when Tatum will be back. Do the Celtics have a feeling like maybe he could be back before the end of the season and help you make a push if you outkicked expectations? Do you even want to put him in that position? But my sense is that in the same way that Brad stressed that he doesn't want to put any limits on what this team, even in its new look nature, might be able to accomplish this season, he also didn't want to put any limitations on Tatum. And I think we know how driven he is. The one thing that Brad continued to stress is that he wants to make sure this is a full recovery, that it sounds like they will make sure that Tatum is not at risk of re-injuring himself whenever they put him back on the court. And it's just probably too early in the procedure. But Every time you see him walking on a pool video or being in there every day, it's okay to be optimistic. I think one thing we know is that Jayson Tatum is going to attack this rehab as hard as he possibly can. Talking to Derek White, and you'll hear this again tomorrow. That he knows he's probably already pretty bored. Said he knows he's going to put in the work and do everything he can to be back on that basketball court as soon as humanly possible, and that's a good thing. How much do you reach out to Jayson? How much have you monitored what he's doing? We were over at the Auerbach Center today, and Brad's telling us he's in there every single day. We saw the water workouts. So, how much are you checking in with JT?
Yeah, I know that he's at the practice facility every day, and I know he's probably bored and wants to do a lot more, but I just been checking in here and there and just seeing how he's doing, seeing how his summer's going, and I just know that he's just going to do everything he can to recover quickly as possible, and I hope to see him soon.
I just think they got to, both sides got to make sure they approach this the right way. And it's a great story if he can come back faster than most, and to use that as motivation to take the Kobe approach of trying to get back. But you just got to safeguard against aggravating that injury further down the road. And I do think, even though the Celtics won't put a timeline on this, you heard the Indiana Pacers come out yesterday and say Tyrese Halliburton is out for the year. They're not taking a chance on this. Celtics won't go that route, but I think they, again, know that they have to proceed the right way with this. Other takeaways. Brad said that if this was the 15-man roster that they carried into the season, the Celtics would be comfortable with that, but also admitted that they'll see what else is out there. I think it's pretty telling when Brad Stevens shows up and there's this big long table, and we've seen like rookie introductions of multiple players up there, or the stadium filled, or the podium filled with owners and coaches and the new player that got acquired in the trade. It's pretty telling that Brad was the only guy up there today trying to make sense of what the Celtics are doing. And so I think that just leaves open the possibility. I suspect we will not hear from Anthony Simons and George Niang until, if maybe they'll pop up at Summer League, or maybe we won't see them until later in the offseason when Boston has more availabilities in advance of the season, maybe even straight up to Media Day, usually in late September or early October. So I think there's still the potential for the Celtics to make some moves here. But Brad, again, stressed that, like, if this is the group, they're going to figure it out. He even acknowledged that, like, you can look at the roster right now, and said he understands why people look at it and say, hey, what's the deal with this center position? And you lose Luke and Al and Kristaps, your top three big men, and now, you got Nemi and Garza, Amari Williams coming in on a two-way. Like, you got to figure some stuff up. Brad even brought up Xavier Tillman, who, we'll see if he makes it through to the final cut of this roster. But the Celtics seem pretty okay with trying to figure out which guys on this current roster can fight their way in. I think they're more excited about the possibility of how it might play out with Derek White and Peyton Pritchard and Jaylen Brown all having an extra dose of motivation going into this season. And Brad talked a lot about having a chip on their shoulder, and mentioned how it had been a long time since a Jaylen Brown team didn't have just like crazy expectations, and how Peyton Pritchard has never played for a team in the pros that hasn't had essentially championship aspirations. So I am super intrigued to see how this team embraces that. I think it's easy from the outside to look at the roster and say, oof, lost a lot, some holes on there. And, that's undeniably true. But I just think, especially in the Eastern Conference, that I don't think everyone will tell you it's got better and all this. Still think the Celtics are right there if Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Peyton Pritchard are healthy. If Sam Hauser's still on this roster, like there's still way too much talent here to be bottoming out, or even, I can't convince myself that they'd be in the play-in. I think they're just better than that. Now circumstances might dictate that they take a bigger step back. Injuries could certainly crop up. You do not have the margin of error that you have in past seasons. But I think there's a little bit of they're invigorated by the quest. And Derek even says, you'll hear it tomorrow, like Joe Mazzulla should be like really, really enthusiastic about trying to tell this team like how it can outkick expectations. And so I think there's a little source of motivation going into the season for this group, and trying to maximize what's left behind, and showing people that the step back won't be as pronounced as maybe people think. The other big topic of the day was just the apron, the luxury tax. So we know the situation right now, right? The Celtics are still just barely over the second apron. There are multiple pathways for them to drop down quickly. I think they're once all the roster shuffling is done, there'll still be a 15 player sign. You only have to carry 14. They could easily get back below the second apron whenever they want. That should be a priority to loosen the restrictions that Brad has spoke a lot about this season, and a necessary evil after what the big spend that they did over the last two seasons to field a championship caliber team. Brad was asked about is the team going to prioritize getting under the tax? Celtics are about roughly $20.5 million over that tax line. So why this matters, and familiar listeners, you'll understand. The Celtics have been in the tax for 3 straight seasons. They are subject to repeater penalties, which have gotten harsher and harsher under the new CBA. And while they've cut their total spend way down, which is going to limit the amount of luxury tax they'll pay, if you linger up there, the repeater penalties linger until you're out of the tax for 2 out of 3 years. So my guess is, listening to Brad, watching the steps they've taken this offseason, I think their plan is to sort of wade into next year, sort of get a look at what this team is, how competitive are they, where do they stand in this new look East, and kind of make some decisions from there. I think I keep saying that they've got flexibility, and some quibble with that notion, but I just think, like, if they get into next year and they're better than they think, there's opportunity to add talent, and I think it's important that the Celtics came out today and noted how, ownership and new owner Bill Chisholm has not come and said, like, hey, you got to get it off the tax. I think they're okay with lingering, not quite the gigantic spend that they had coming out of the year, but with paying some money if they feel like there's a competitive product. One of the things that has been a hallmark of this Celtics team is paying when there is a legitimate chance to win. They've avoided the tax in the years that they are not. And so I wonder if there will be an option to downshift to reshape the roster to get away from that tax, maybe start the process of trying to get under. It's difficult because as soon as Jayson Tatum is healthy, you're going to want to be back in the mix and you're going to want to spend. So is it realistic to say that they can get under the tax in 2 of the next 3 seasons in order to reset those repeater penalties? It might not be. But if you at least give yourself the opportunity to think about it, and with the contracts that come off next season, there's a pathway to do it in potentially this season and next. And then maybe when Tatum is back at the peak of his powers, you are more likely and more able to spend and more freely to spend because you're not dealing with paying 4.5 times every dollar over the luxury tax line. So just a balance there they're going to strike. I think, again, Brad spoke pretty highly of both Niang and Simons, and we'll see, get into the season, see if they can help you. And if not, those are 2 guys that should be desirable at the February trade deadline. Again, teams will probably try to limit what the Celtics are going to want to limit what they take back in terms of at least long-term money, because both are expiring. You'd prefer to just get off that money going into next year. But I think the one notable thing that Brad said is that the team won't give up future assets just to get below the tax. And the insinuation there to me is, like, look, you're trying to stockpile now for the future. There is a pathway to getting off more money just by letting this season ride out, and that they just really don't want to. They're not just going to punt on a year. That has never been it. Like, Brad actually, kind of like pushed back on the notion of a rebuild. He's like, he hates that word. Doesn't believe in it. This is a retooling, and retooling doesn't have a definitive timeline, and it doesn't have it doesn't mean that you don't take a step back, but the notion is that you're gonna find a way to get this thing back to the championship level. You just got to take the right steps to get there, and you don't have to take them all right at once. They started the process with the Kristaps and Drew deals, and now they've got to kind of examine the pathway forward. You're not going to spend a first-round pick or multiple seconds just to get off Anthony Simon's money when you can bring him into the season, see what he is, maybe nurture his development, maybe make him an even more valuable asset by the time the trade deadline rolls around. So they're just trying to navigate that path. I don't think they're necessarily saying they're not going to be out of the tax. I think they need it's a wait-and-see situation. They've got that flexibility. They've got the ability to maneuver and maybe even loosen some more restrictions, even if you just get off the first apron or if it's all the way out of the tax or limit your total spend. And so there's options here, and we'll talk a lot about that as we go along in the season about where their mindset might be and what those next moves might be. Brad did say conversation usually comes down pretty hard after the June draft. All 30 teams will be out at Summer League. There could be some more conversations there, but I think, looking back in history, you usually see sometimes and when I think back to summer moves, Kyrie was in August. The Drew Holiday deal wasn't until September. Sometimes these things, it's when teams start taking a look at their roster and the reality of next season starts setting in that you start to make more moves. So for right now, the Celtics are content with where they're at. Luka Garza and Josh Minot signed up today. You got new blood in the gym. Brad spoke highly about the compete level they can bring. Ugo, a lot of rave reviews. You'll hear Jordan Walsh talking about the first impression and how much Celtics fans are going to like him based on the way he plays.
What did you see from Ugo here in practice?
He plays hard, really hard. So fans are going to love that. He plays hard. He dives on the floor. He's a defensive menace, and then he attacks the rim with force. I think everybody knows that, but it was my first time seeing him play and be able to watch it and go against it. It got me one time. It's been cool for sure.
So I know, again, it's when I got to the office today, people were asking, what was the vibe like over at the Auerbach Center? And sometimes when the team is in a little bit of transition and flux, you'd think that maybe the energy would be down a little bit. Brad acknowledged it's tough to say goodbye to players like Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis and Luke Cornett and even Al Horford, even though I didn't want to speak in absolutes about that. But I think they're hopeful that this could be pretty fun. That maybe they switch up the way they play a little bit. Maybe they fight a little harder on the court. Maybe they cut a little harder. Maybe they just develop a new identity beyond just the talent that they gushed in past seasons. It's gonna be, I keep telling people, I think it could be a really fun year. My mind immediately goes back to some of those 2015, 16, 17, those Isaiah Thomas years. I don't know if Jaylen or Derek are gonna elevate to the MVP conversation. If there's somebody on this roster that's just gonna go to a new level, but I know there's talent here, and I know that these guys are motivated to show that they are better than what people think based on the players that they've lost. And like I said, well, let's not get too far ahead because there could still be some shuffling before the final product hits the floor. And even then, there may be changes along the way. But it was cool to see everybody in the gym, even the summer leaguers. We got a whole bunch of summer league games coming on our air next week. And like I said, slam that like and subscribe button because tomorrow we're coming back with a full cut from the Derek White chat. He was out in Parker, Colorado, doing his camp. He was kind enough to beam in. And the fans, anyone who's been worried about this offseason should be most warmed by the fact that he had that big old Celtics logo on the center of his shirt. And he talks a lot about what it's like to hear your name in rumbles. So go like, go subscribe, go check us out on the YouTube page. Here's more from today at the Auerbach Center.
I want to start by saying thank you to Drew and KP and Luke for all that they gave here and all that they meant here. I think I could go into great detail on each of them, but Drew being here for 2 years, KP being here for 2 years, obviously had a huge impact, not only on our team, but on the city and the community and everything else. And Luke being here a little bit longer than that, same thing. And so we wish those guys well. We'll be rooting for them from afar. I'm happy to answer any questions about them. But I think that's really important to say because those guys are all, really important people to all of us.
Hey, Brad, regarding the signings of Luka Garza and Josh Minott, what did you see in them that led to those moves, and what's your expectations for them coming here?
I think one of the things that obviously we've been limited in the, what tools we can use with where we are right around the second apron. And so we're looking for guys on those contracts that have upside, that are competitors, that are workers, that want to be good, that haven't hit their peak yet, but we've seen something in them that we think gives them a chance to be very impactful. Luka obviously has been a stats darling, but in limited time behind very, very good players. And same thing with Minott. Minott is a guy that brings a lot of versatility to the table. Is a person that can guard several positions, can shoot a little bit, but plays with great energy and length. And both those guys really rebound. And so, as we have a team that is being retooled, right? I think the biggest thing is that bringing in guys that can complement our best players and our core, but also have some upside and maybe some unrealized upside thus far. And so, and they were in a great situation. They were coached by a great coach in Chris Finch, in a great organization with a ton of talent, and they're used to winning. I like that too.
And Peyton is someone who always talks about challenging himself, having a growth mindset. What are the keys coming off a career year to maximizing the opportunity that's in front of him next season?
Peyton Pritchard?
Yes.
I haven't thought a ton about how much roster change will change Peyton Pritchard's work ethic because it's always at the highest. He's as good as it gets with his work. So Peyton will prioritize winning, which he always has, and will continue to grow in his game, which he always has. That's what he does. That's who he is. I've said many times, loves basketball, and that love basketball, loves to compete, loves to play hard. Those factors all matter. We had those with the guys we lost, and we will be continuing to look for those with the guys we bring in.
Brad, you sort of mentioned it in your opening statement. It's always hard to trade guys like Drew and Kristaps, but there's been all the talk of like financial situations and aprons and luxury taxes. I'm curious how much the second apron penalties came into those two trades as well as luxury taxes, because you guys have been a second apron team for 2 years before this.
I mean, the second apron's why those trades happen. I think that those are pretty obvious. And the basketball penalties associated with those are real. We've all talked about that. And but we were fortunate because we liked the guys we got back, and I think that that's one of the things that, we are excited about. But yeah, like Drew Holiday is I think he stamped his Hall of Famer candidacy here, if he didn't already have it. And we'll look forward to watching and again rooting and following him from afar. But he's as good of a person as you could ever have in your building and as part of your team. And KP, he fought some of the stuff health-wise in the last 2 years, but when he played, he was awfully good, and we think he'll be awfully good for Atlanta this year. And so again, yeah, those are not easy trades to make. Those are not easy phone calls. Obviously, those guys have been around the league a long time. They knew the CBA. They knew that was a high likelihood that they could be part of a move, and they were communicated that before. But it's still hard when you are. But again, we will miss them, and we're thankful for them.
And then what about those two guys, Anthony and George's, made you target them in those types of trades?
Well, I just think one at a time. I think Anthony is a guy that people out here probably don't see as much because of the time that they play. But his ability to score, his ability to shoot the ball, make really hard shots is pretty elite. And you look at a guy that's 26 years old that's averaged 20 a game for 3 straight years. I think he's a really good player, and I think he can get better. And that's a big part of it. And then Niang is, Niang has just added value to winning on each team he's been on, and it's he's a pain to play against, which I very much admire. And he knows what he does well, and he knows how to bring out the best in his group. It's not a coincidence that he was a part of the rotation on those really good Philly teams. He was a part of the rotation this year in Cleveland before the trade. Like, guy is a winner, knows how to play, knows how to bring out the best in people, and so happy he's here.
Me? At least from the outside coming into this season, the expectations, the outlook will likely be different this season. So insofar as you're concerned, as the guy who runs the organization, aside from the obvious, which is that everyone works hard and focuses and so forth, what are your expectations for this season?
My expectations are always the same. Compete like hell to win the next game. That's always going to be it. That will always be it. And that's the way that we're going to try to put our foot forward. We've got some new guys. We've got some guys that'll have to take on extra in their roles. But we believe in the guys that have been in the building, and we look forward to getting the guys that haven't, and all working together to try to create a team that functions well together and plays hard as hell. And that'll be it. I've said many times that the North Star for me is winning championships, and this is without question. When you trade guys like Drew and KP, there's some retooling going on. But the one thing that when I was coaching, when the term rebuild came up, I thought it was a crazy term. None of us were here before, so it should be build, right? You're always building and growing towards something. And for this group, we've got so many guys back that are really good players that's not going to be part of the lexicon in our building. And that's the way we're going to focus moving forward.
Brad, you mentioned after the draft that re-signing Al Horford would be a priority. Is that still a priority to you guys at this point?
I don't know what I can say about this or not say about it. I mean, we made offers to both Luke and Al. We would love to have had both of them back. I'd say that's unlikely. And the only reason I haven't talked about Al is because that's not final. I could probably talk about Al my whole press conference and not say enough. But I don't want to speak in absolute terms until an ultimate decision is made. But another guy that if he were to go and play somewhere else, I think is an all-time Celtic and winner and did everything he could for this organization and not only from the games but also how he impacted our younger players who in a lot of ways now have to take what they've learned from the Drews and the Als and people like that and apply that from a leadership role.
Brett, I know the tools you have, you're limited in what you can do now for the rest of the offseason here, but how do you kind of view the roster right now? Are you still looking, could you go into next season with this roster? Are you still looking at potential tweaks? Where would you want to address things if you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality of kind of the schedule of things, right, is there will probably be some conversations that all 30 teams have in Vegas, but it's a lot less than around the draft and a lot less than, even around as the moratorium comes to a close. And so I'd say that, who knows what will happen. But as far as us, we're very comfortable with this group heading into next season.
Sort of building on that, there's been a lot of talk about the second apron, but how driven are you by possibly getting out of the luxury tax and maybe starting to reset the repeater tax? And how much of a factor does that play in the situations you guys, the decisions you guys make? I
mean, I think there's value in those things, obviously, and you weigh those values, and the people at the top have to ultimately make those decisions. But it's been pretty clear, and Bill has been pretty clear from the get-go that he wants to make sure that we're prioritizing basketball assets and the ability to retool this thing at the highest level that we can. And, again, the most important, acquisition that we're going to be able to make in the next couple of years is getting Tatum out of a boot, right? Like, we're not beating that one. So that's going to be the best thing that can happen for us. But, everything else we want to, we have most of our first round picks still, other than the 29 one. We have a lot of seconds now, so we have some flexibility there, and we want to we don't want to take away our chance to use those to become the best that we can be over the next few years, just to make a move to help save money. And I think that that's been very clearly stated to me. And I think that that's, we'll continue to look at how we can make things a little bit better or tweak things around the edges, and maybe something comes up in the next couple of weeks. But, that's been our mindset.
Right. I just kind of want to follow up on that, because the repeater tax is a sort of basketball penalty, right? Because,
Sure.
So resetting the repeater tax, is that a priority for you guys?
Like I said, there's benefits to that, but it's not the priority, right? The priority is continuing to make sure that we have, our future firsts and all these things that are in play for us, so that we can then use those to build.
Brad, back here.
Mm-hmm.
How, after going through what you went through and knowing how difficult, or finding out how difficult it would be, how optimistic are you about sooner rather than later getting back to that championship level that you want to be at?
Yeah, I mean, I said this when I was coaching all the time. I'd never put a ceiling on any team. We were fortunate to have a number of teams there as we led up to this kind of window that were really fun, and that I thought never really cared about ceilings and had a chip on their shoulder, and I expect that this team will too. I mean, the last time that Jaylen Brown was on a team that was doubted was a long time ago, right? And the last time that Peyton Pritchard's been on a team that was doubted, he probably hasn't been yet. So and you go down the list, Derek White and all these guys. So I'm excited to see what this team has in store. I know Joe's excited. Joe seems, they're trying a bunch of stuff out there now with our summer league team that we haven't done in the past, that I think will be really, it'll be good experimentation at the very least. But that's kind of what we want to make sure we're ready to maximize this group.
I want to clarify something you said last time. You said Joe has multiple years left on his contract.
That's right.
And how big of a priority is possibly coming to an extension with him, coming to something long-term this summer?
We'd love to have Joe here for a long time.
Brad, you've had to make a lot of tough calls in the past few years. Has it gotten any easier for you delivering the trade news to guys like Drew and Porzingis, and how have they handled that?
No, it's never easy. Well, Porzingis was asleep, and by the time he woke up, I was asleep. But he knew he was probably going to get traded, so I think he was okay by then. But no, I actually talked to both those guys a couple weeks before, and just said, listen, there's a chance that you're back, but there's also a high chance that you're not. And the agents have done a good job of understanding the challenges of the new CBA and the second aprons, and it was really important for us to again, get us out of that penalty box in a lot of ways, because you can feel those, and those are real things. And so I had conversations with both of them prior to, so there's still hard phone calls to make. It's harder to think about not seeing Drew and KP in and around the facility every day. That's the hardest part.
Brad, so just curious, I know obviously these penalties were always going to be in place, and you knew that heading into the season. Tatum goes down, that's the part you didn't know. How much did that impact these offseason moves, and do you think that we maybe would have seen a lot of these moves anyways, regardless of his injury? How much did it change the trajectory of this offseason?
It's a good question. I think the reality is that we knew going into this year, regardless of how it ended, that we were going to have some really hard decisions to make because of the penalties. Because of the way that this apron is and where we've been the last couple of years. We've been now in it for 2 years, and it was the 2 years that are the least punitive years. Now that it's fully kicked in 3 years after the CBA started, so that was part of making the decision to push and put our chips on the table and go for it the last 2 years. But we've known for a long time that hard decisions were coming. And I think the agents and players have known that too. I mean, that's been pretty well communicated. Tatum's injury certainly is something that we have to consider, but more so, I think it's about we've still been very focused on, okay, we're going to have some change. We have limited tools to bring back the guys like Luke or Al, the guys that we've really appreciated being here. And how do we bring in the right people then that have upside that can accentuate Jaylen and Derek and Peyton and Sam and make sure that we continue to, build and grow this thing and put ourselves in position to maximize it.
And then the big man rotation is the one that was the most hampered this summer with the offseason moves. What are your thoughts on the guys that you currently have on the roster and like their ability to be kind of holding down the fort in the front court?
We're going to find out, right? I think I think we had an incredible luxury with Luke and Nimi as our third and fourth centers, because I think they were both much better than that. And I think Luke will have an amazing impact in San Antonio, and I think Nimi has a great chance to be impactful here. We've always liked Luka Garza from afar, and we think that he has, the real physicality that's necessary on both ends of the floor, especially on the glass, in addition to his ability to score. And then, you got Amari, who's down there now, and we think that he has a high upside. And then you can flex other guys into that center role. Tillman is more of a 4 probably, but he can flex into that center role. And so we'll have to do that by committee. That group will not be the group that people will single out based on paper on what they've done with their careers thus far as our strongest position. But it's up to them to prove it otherwise.
You just mentioned the CBA a few minutes ago, and so you kind of knew something along these lines was coming. So my question is, the Tatum injury obviously changed it. Is that correct? I mean, it took it from here to here. Would you agree with that?
What do you mean?
In terms of your off-season busyness, that the Tatum thing would have changed things? Or
yeah, I mean, who knows, right? Where we end up, how it goes, who knows, right? There's all kinds of factors. But yes, that without question brings, some clarity. But listen, like at the end of the day, we've known again that we were going to push that. We've been in that area or in that second apron area for 2 straight years. We knew that this was going to be, being in it the 3rd straight year, it was going to be very punitive.
All right. So I guess my question is, when was there a moment, as you look back on this years from now, was there a moment, the minute Tatum was injured, the morning after, when you were shaving, you were on the phone, when it occurred to you that whatever you were planning, you need to fold that into it and readjust and so forth?
It's a good question. I think that moment, when we traded for Brogdon, we knew we were getting into, we knew what was coming, right? Eventually, but we knew we were going to put the pedal to the metal. And then when that became Holiday, same thing, right? So in each of those moments, and you have meetings and you think about it. And then when Tatum goes down, it certainly makes you, okay, let's all get together. Let's talk about what this means. Let's talk about what it means in the near term, long term. Because I think one of the things about the Tatum injury that is really important to us is that there's no expectation on timeline to return. But there's an expectation on fully returning. And so that was part of it too, right? But yeah, each of those things probably factors in. It's a good question. Oh, God, I don't know. Was there a moment? I mean, I knew when I walked back to the locker room, and so there was probably a moment that night, staying in New York and on the phone and talking about it and thinking about it. I don't think when you watch the Pacers go through it in Game 7, I know Mike and I were both, in conversation with their GMs, like anything we can do to help, let us know, because we've been through it. It looked like it on TV. Those are hard things to go through, and they're emotional, but it's more emotional about, and it's probably more impactful, Steve, for how you feel about the player. Like, just, you hate to see that. And so that is a lot less, you're not talking as much about the team building yet, but there are moments in the next few weeks where you do.
Final questions, Gary, Adam, and Ian.
Right. Obviously, there's a lot of emphasis on next year because of the getting under the second apron and Tatum being out. But it seems like there's got to be preparation now for taking advantage of the window that Tatum and Brown still have when they take Jaylen be 29 in October. Tatum's going to be 28 or something when he comes back. Like that window where you have two kind of, top 15 players. What's the emphasis on preparing the team for 26, 27 and beyond, preparing a team around Jayson when he returns to be championship contenders, as opposed to you've kind of taken maybe the hit this year, but what's kind of the mentality of planning for the future?
That's a good question. I think the best way to say it, Gary, is since I moved into this role, my entire focus has been making sure we maximize around those guys. And so that's longer than just this upcoming window. That's been this whole window.
It's kind of a two-parter on Jayson. One, just kind of how is he doing? He's obviously, we see the updates, walking in the pool. It seems like he's here a lot from social media. And also, I'm sure you saw the Pacers yesterday ruled Tyrese out for the year already to kind of remove pressure, remove distractions. Is that something you guys anticipate looking at? I know you've talked about not putting a timeline for return, but have you is that something you guys?
We're not even talking about timeline for return. We're not even going there. And Jayson is working every single day. He has literally been here every day, except he took a few days break. But when he takes a few days break, Nick goes with him, so he's still working every single day. It's been unique to be here in June and the early part of July, and both Jayson and Jaylen are here. We've played obviously late, and this is usually a time where guys get away, but coming off of each of them having surgery, they've both been here. Jaylen was in this morning, did a shooting workout, looks good, and Jayson was in moving pretty fast on that boot today. So all indications are they're both progressing at incredible rates, which is great, but we're not going to put any pressure on Jayson to get back anytime soon. And, we have no reason to believe that Jaylen won't be all clear and ready to go, fairly shortly.
Speaking of Jaylen, he's probably going to be the number one option, quote unquote, so to speak, for next season. Have you communicated that with him? What's his reaction to that? And, how is he embracing that role moving forward next year?
I leave all those communications to Joe. The way that I look at a basketball team is we all bring our strengths to the table and then we function together. So everybody has a huge role in it. There's no question that Jaylen will draw the most attention and that Jaylen will, I think thrive in that. I think that you saw him several times, and you saw him in certainly the few games in the playoffs where we had to play without JT, and I thought he did a good job, especially those two home games. And I think that he's ready for any challenge. He always has been, and I'm excited to see all these guys, take a step up again. I'm excited to see the chip on their shoulder. I think that's I think we've always had it. I think it's always been we've had a competitive group with a competitive mindset. But we've, maybe had much higher expectations or some higher expectations. So I'm excited to see us get ready to go, and Jaylen will be a big part of that.